really want a hype team involved. So if they're having a good night and they fell asleep really quickly, the next morning, celebrate it, right? Get grandma on FaceTime, tell their teachers right in front of them or send them an email. Make sure everybody's a part of their hype team.
Welcome to the Beehive Doc Talks with Dr. Blair Rolnick. As a pediatrician and mother herself, Dr. Rolnick is here to answer your most pressing parenting questions and guide you through the tough spots.
Welcome back to Be Kind Pediatrics. For those of you who are new to the show, my name is Dr. Blair Rolnick. I am a board-certified pediatrician and mom myself. I have Kate Faraci here today, who is the founder of It Starts With Sleep. And we're going to be talking a little bit about school-age sleep-ish. Kate, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Kate Faraci. I've been studying child development for over 20 years, and I'm a certified pediatric sleep consultant and the founder of It Starts With Sleep. And I work with children from ages 0 up to age 7. I have a master's in special and general education, and I've been teaching early childhood for 16 years and counting, which I'm very proud of. And my most important job is being a mom to 3 of a 6, 5, and 2-year-old.
Amazing. So tell us a little bit how you got into sleep then.
Sure. So it's very clear I'm passionate about helping children and families. It's a big part of my life. I know the impact that sleep has in the home and how it affects your entire family and the entire house. So it brings me a lot of joy to help families with their sleep, bring that peace back into the home. And, it helps the child's brain and development, and it really helps the mental health for the parents too.
I couldn't agree more. It's kind of interesting because I'm just now making this connection, but when I talk to parents, particularly parents with children who are struggling to sleep, one of the big concerns I have as their pediatrician that always sleep so affects their ability to not only function, but executive functioning skills. Yes. And particularly when it comes to school and school concerns, one of the first questions I'm always asking when something pops up, like a teacher's concern that a child is inattentive or that they are seeming like they're squirmy or a little bit hyper, fidgety in class, or they're struggling with multiple subjects. And let's first talk about their sleep, what's going on with their sleep, because I find that you first have to optimize sleep before you really think about some of the other additional kind of differentials in that diagnosis, at least for me. Definitely. So it's kind of cool that you have both backgrounds because they really go hand in hand, sleep, nutrition, and learning.
Yeah, it definitely affects their behaviors, right? And we all know when we're tired, how grumpy we feel and how it affects our behavior. So imagine a child who doesn't have the maturity level yet to handle those behaviors and just can't say, I'm exhausted. We could say that. Not every child can.
Yeah. And it really became especially, I think, I didn't realize how much sleep could affect your overall ability to control your behavior and happiness. Probably really until I started my residency training. I was truly sleep deprived. And then there was a time where I was good again. And then when I had my son, I was whoa, this feels a lot like my every 3-day, 24-hour, 36-hour shifts, except it's every day.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. With my oldest, who's now 6, when she was 3, she went through a really tough period. And it's part of the reason I started this business too. And she was having a hard time falling asleep and she was waking up multiple times at night. And it just rocked us. My husband and I were tired, frustrated, angry. We just wanted to scream, go back to sleep. What happened to our sleeper? Had I known about sleep training and sleep consulting and known more at the time, the phase probably would have lasted much less than it did for us. So now being able to educate families and helping them go through it a lot faster than we did, it just brings me a lot of joy. And I think of the Snickers commercials, you're not yourself when you're hungry, you're not yourself when you're tired either. And it just really affects your parenting.
Yeah, for sure. So that actually makes me think about, for me, some of the most common sleep problems that I start to see is actually in that early 3 to 4-year-old range, especially around transitioning from the crib to the bed. Do you have any kind of tips or thoughts on how to make that transition? Is that also a time where you start to see the emergence of potential, like maybe going from a great sleeper to somebody who's having a harder time falling and maintaining their sleep?
Yeah, that's definitely a time that we see this. First of all, when a child's coming out of a crib and transitioning into a toddler bed, I think my biggest point of advice is patience, right? It's a transition, and a lot of parenting comes with transitions that just take time to work through. And, making sure that the child knows what's expected of them when they go into a toddler bed. So I think feel strongly that when a child has a strong foundation for sleep and they know what's expected of them when they sleep in their crib, it's very likely that it's easier to go into a bed. That's not to say that they won't be out of their bed when the first night they might be. But when they already, when they have that solid foundation, which means they are an independent sleeper, they're going to bed with ease at night. There's very minimal wake ups. Obviously, there's always some, but very minimal wake ups. Wake up pretty pleasant. They really know what's expected of them for sleep. So when they transition to a bed, it tends to be a little bit easier. So if you could build that foundation in the crib, that's a good time to do it. It'll help when they go into a bed. And then I think about, when it's time to convert to a bed, first of all, hold off as long as you can.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, what age do you kind of think is that, or find that sweet spot? Because I sometimes get it as early as like my 2-year-old visit. I'm usually like,
little early.
Probably too early.
Yes. I have a 2-year-old, or just turned 2-year-olds. I can't imagine him in a bed anytime soon. It's more for families to know that crib feels secure to them, so when I do have small children, but some families might say, oh, they're outgrowing their crib. They're not. That's all they know, right? So they're comfortable there, just like a car seat, right? They only know in the beginning that they're rear facing. That's what they know. So definitely hold off as long as you can. 2 is typically not what I advise to move into a bed if you don't have to. I know some families might be growing their families and a second baby might be coming and they're thinking about moving the crib. So that's tricky. If you have the means, maybe buy a second used crib for the time being, borrow another crib, instead of feeling like there's a rush to move into a bed. And if you have to move into a bed on the earlier side, again, talk about those expectations. I think more towards the age of 3 is probably the better time. And you're going to have a family meeting with the 3-year-old and tell them all about what to do when they move into their bed. It's also a good time to maybe implement an okay to wake clock, like the hatch or something like that. Go over what colors mean for sleep and what it means to wake up. And so much about working with toddlers and up is your wording, right? So instead of you have to stay in your bed when the clock is purple, tell them as soon as it turns green, come and get me, right? It gives them this sense of ownership to it.
Yeah. I love that. That's a great tip. I mean, I usually think about, for me, like, if they're safe in their crib, like they're not the toddler who's flipping out of it and falling on the ground. Some babies pick up that skill on the early side. And then like, I understand the, maybe the rush to get them out of the crib. But outside of that, I'm like, they're really never going to be well, they could be, but not for a long time. Are they going to be truly too big for that space? So I'm always like, delay it as long as possible.
And as safe as possible. To your point.
Like, when they're flipping out of it, I'm like, okay, I get it. It's time.
Yes.
But outside of that, I really don't ever like push for them to switch to the toddler bed.
Same here.
And then the other things I like that you said, the toddler clock is a great one. I always like to mention it to parents, but I always like, make sure that your child is developmentally appropriatly at an age where they actually know their colors and you're sure they know their colors.
Yes, that's a good call.
Because again, sometimes there are some 2 to 3-year-olds who are still working, hopefully not still working on their color identification. And I do like the tip of telling them to go get you, because I find that toddlers find like tasks and assignments so empowering. It makes them really happy, and it's
definitely. And on the other end too, they hear no all the time. So when you tell them they can do something, like you can come out of your room at that time, it makes them feel really confident.
Do you ever get parents who feel like telling them, because I think that is nice, and that I sometimes hear parents say, like, I feel like I'm telling them that they can't come get me, or that I don't want them to come get me, or I don't want them.
Yeah. I think that's such a good question, because I think a secure attachment is when a child knows that they can, right?
Right.
I have 3 children who know that they can call me if they need to, or at least the 5 and 6-year-old do. The 2-year-old, he's okay. But my oldest still wakes up with a nightmare sometimes. My youngest sometimes his belly might hurt. So they know if they could call mommy or daddy, we're going to be there for them. We're going to help them. We're going to give them a sip of water, a hug and kiss, and they know it's time to go back to sleep. And that to me is a really secure attachment that we've developed a really strong relationship when it comes to sleep. And they know that we are there for them.
Yeah, nightmares are always a particularly, I think, challenging one, and that it is very emotionally traumatizing, mostly for the parents to deal with. But that's when I'm always like, I always kind of, if they're the right age, I'm like, try if it's consistently waking them up. Because again, I always kind of talk to parents about the fact that preservation of sleep is really important for your child's health. I like the kind of that we've talked about or brought up nightmares, because I think it is another common time, especially in school age children, where you get the emergence of nightmares, and that might be a new sleep problem that a family hasn't previously dealt with, especially if this is their first child. Do you have any kind of recommendations for parents who are like really struggling with just nightmare wake-ups?
Yeah, so nightmares are tough. We still have them in our home. I still have them, right? So figuring out a way to give your child the right coping mechanisms on what to do when they have them. And it takes time to get there. This is not an overnight fix. So much of sleep training and sleep methods are not an overnight fix. So being patient with it. I like to tell a family who might be struggling with nightmares is to talk, before bed about all the good dreams you're going to have. Yeah. So think about what the child is interested in. Tell them, how about tonight we go to the beach and we have a big ice cream party with all your school friends. That way that's their last thought before going to bed. And potentially if they wake up, they're still thinking about it. But nightmares are really hard. I think the next day, when you go in the middle of the night, you don't really want to talk too much about it because it could actually wake them more and overstimulate them. You kind of just want to comfort them, be there for them, maybe give them a sip of water, a kiss, and put them back to sleep. And then the next day, talk about it. Sometimes they don't even remember, and sometimes they do, and you're able to talk about it and validate their feelings. I think it's good for parents also to give an example and make one up that you had a nightmare and what you did to help yourself go back to sleep. So tell them about this bad nightmare within reason that doesn't scare them, and that you woke up, you took a sip of water, you took a deep breath, and then you thought about the great day at the park that you guys had together, and that helped you go back to sleep. So whenever you can model these good behaviors, especially around sleep, hopefully it carries through, and just continue to do that as often as you can.
Yeah, that's a great tip. I mean, I find that the problem I'm often seeing is that child is waking up from nightmare and going into their parents' room and then staying for the rest of the night, which is where I kind of tell parents, we want to teach them how to go back to sleep on their own in their bed, because it's so important for them to get a good night's sleep. And we know you're both not sleeping. Not only are you not sleeping well as a parent, but more importantly, your child's not sleeping well with you in the bed. And so I'm always like, obviously comfort them, bring them back to their room, ideally comfort them in their bed, in their own room. I love young kids, like toddler, 2 to 6 is like my favorite age, because they're so imaginative and their brains are amazing. And I'm like, this is sometimes I think maybe something you can use to your advantage with nightmares. Like I always, for my nieces, I did like a bottle of water and sprayed it around the room and said this is our anti-monster spray. We used dream catchers, which they loved, all sorts of fun, imaginative ways to make them feel reassured that their room is completely safe.
Yeah. And I think it's so important to align your verbal language with your body language too, when it comes to things like monsters or anything like that. You want to make sure that you're saying monsters are not real and shutting it down. And then that way your body language matches up to that too. And you're not looking around for any monsters because you just said they're not real, right? So that's, I think being factual with the child, as transparent as you can be for their age and what's appropriate. But they're going to have and develop more fears and anxieties and thoughts. And once they enter school, they learn a lot more. And, you want to shelter them as long as you can, but there's a lot out there. So as long as we're validating their feelings, the next day talking about what was hard for them and making sure they know that you're there for them. So I wanted to ask you, what kind of issues are you seeing from your patients in regards to sleep, especially for the children who are 2.5, 3 years old and up?
Yeah, I would say that under 2 categories, especially the under 1 categories, is totally its own thing. For the more preschool and school age children, there's usually 2 problems. One, either parents are spending an incredible amount of time to get them to sleep and to stay asleep. Or 2, they are waking up frequently throughout the night. So they're waking up in their crib, and the parents are then going in and again providing a lot of support to get them back to sleep, or they're in a bed and they're coming into their room, and either most commonly staying there for the night.
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing a lot of that. It's so important for families to know that it's very common and it's also very resolvable. So much of this is just building a boundary around sleep. And there's a lot that goes to it. And again, there's no magic wand, nothing's going to change overnight, but it's definitely resolvable. So first and foremost, it's important to know that bedtime and middle of the night wakes are 2 totally different things. You can work on them simultaneously, but know that if you start to see progress in one area, it might not happen for the other area right away. So you might start to see progress at bedtime, that it's taking less time for them to fall asleep, and then there might still be night wakings, and that's very common. Yeah. So I find strongly to implement a really solid sleep training method, and there's not hundreds out there. There's a select few, and when you execute them appropriately and properly, that's when you see better sleep in your home. And when you build that boundary around sleep and you set those expectations for the child, that's when it gets easier. And again, it's more about, there is a matter of being a little bit firm around this stuff and, not giving in to one more book and things like that. And it's so important for families to know that they're not depriving their child when they're doing that. They're just teaching them a new way to fall asleep. So as far as bedtime goes, you could start by having a family meeting and talk about all the things that's expected of them for sleep. Write it down on a list. If your preschooler likes to draw, have them draw a picture about it, get them really involved. When you're talking about your family expectations in this meeting, also talk about what your bedtime routine checklist is going to entail, and hang this in the child's room. And this is where you could pre-negotiate a little bit with the child. You might know that your child might stall a little bit and ask for more bathroom trips. That's very common. So have 2 or 3 bathroom trips on the bedtime routine checklist. And when they ask for the 4th one, go back to the list and said, we did it 3 times. Obviously with bathrooming, you know your child best. And if you feel they might have a bowel movement or something, you could take care of that. But try to figure out the difference of when they're just trying to stall versus a need. The bedtime routine checklist can include 12 kisses before bed, right? You want to really connect during that time. And this includes some type of wash up if you're not bathing every night, washing up, brushing teeth, using the bathroom if they need to, really engaging during book time, giving at least 15, 20 minutes of story time. I think it's also important to practice some role play with their stuffed animals about good sleep hygiene. I have a client who recently asked that their child doesn't really love stuffed animals, but she likes to draw. So we decided on her drawing some characters, cutting them out, and that's how you do the role play, and modeling really good sleep habits. And then once you have all that done and it's time for bedtime, that's when you start to implement a sleep training method. Some sleep training methods are more gentle than others and more parent present, something like cheer method where you're in the room for a few nights. And it's really important to remain emotionless. The more calm you are, that's the energy that you're going to feed off to for your child, that they'll pick up on. You're going to stay there until your child falls asleep. And then if they wake in the middle of the night, you're going to go right back to that chair. And then you withdraw that process. After a few nights, you move the chair and you're in the middle of the room. Again, you're staying put until they fall asleep. Same thing for middle of the night wakes as well, until you're fully out of the room and hopefully in a week or 2. Patience is key. Consistency is key, right? It's so important to think of the perspective of the child. If you're trying one thing one night and something the other night, it's very confusing. Right. So once this is all clear, that's when it gets easier. There's other approaches like a silent return, where if the child's walking out of their room, if they're in a bed, you silently walk them back and put them back into bed. And then you withdraw that process as well, where you could walk them to their door. And then eventually just a verbal send back. Again, that's just setting a boundary. And what I like to call sometimes is like a loving limit around sleep. And yeah, I think it's important for families to know that they're not depriving them. When they stick to the bedtime routine checklist, it gives the child more security that they know what's expected of them.
Yeah, it's a really actually interesting, similar technique that I usually recommend for parents struggling with behavioral issues in the home. So I would say, like, have a family meeting, pick your boundaries and your rules, try to limit it to a few rules for that purpose, but have everybody sign it, get engaged in it. The other interesting things that I kind of heard you say are, I think parents, this is actually hardest for parents, and much harder for parents than it is for the children. So I try to tell parents, like, do this when you have good support. If your spouse or partner is somebody who travels for work, plan it for a time that you're both going to be present and available to each other. Try to plan it at a time where, if they're an older kid, maybe on a school break, or you're home where there's consistency, you're not traveling or going anywhere. And try to take a couple minutes before you start your bedtime routine to give yourself whatever your mantra is, that you're going to stay calm and happy and present for your child.
That's such great advice. I think of it in both ways. For the child, you really want a hype team involved. So if they're having a good night and they fell asleep really quickly, the next morning, celebrate it, right? Get grandma on FaceTime, tell their teachers right in front of them, or send them an email. Make sure everybody's a part of their hype team. And then the other side too is having a really healthy mindset around this for parents is key. When I find the older the child, 4, 5, 6, it's really more about the mindset than the method itself. For parents, it's very likely when you start something new for sleep, the child's not going to like it, and they're going to express that. And it's so important to know that you're not letting them cry or leaving them to cry. You're just teaching them a new way to fall asleep. And that's how they're just telling you, I don't like this. There could be protesting, there could be tantrums, and that's okay. They can have those moments. When you stay firm with what you're doing, they'll start to understand, A, it's not a game, and B, I can do this, right? So you want to have the mindset that you're mentally prepared, that it's going to be hard. They are going to be upset. It's okay, but I'm going to hold that line. And then also making sure that they know the next day, that was really hard for you, but remember, I'm here for you. And showing up for the child and making sure they know that you believe in them. When you show up in a way like that, when you're ready to go, they're going to believe that too.
Yeah. And I think also just as a parent, like, being in the mindset and reminding yourself why you're doing this. You're not doing it to punish your child or because you personally want to sleep. I think a lot of parents feel like, am I being selfish? Is this about my sleep? And just kind of, I think, reminding yourself why you're here in the first place, to help your child be a healthy sleeper, because you really believe that that's what's best for their overall health. And, like, tell yourself that every day if you have to, because if you don't really believe that you're doing this for your child's best interest, it's really hard sometimes to implement.
Yeah, sleep training is really hard, but what parents are doing previous to it is much harder. There's so much unpredictability sometimes, and so much anxiety that builds up. I love at the end of my time together with families when a family says, I love bedtime again, so you want to get to that point of enjoying it, connecting, and everybody goes to sleep peacefully.
We're out of time today, but I look forward to discussing more on next week's episode. And for the parents who are out there in the thick of it, we all feel for you. Stay tuned for hopefully some more helpful information and tips.
Thank you for watching the Beehive Doc Talks with Dr. Blair Rolnick. For more episodes and her practice, visit BeKindPediatrics.com, and don't forget to subscribe for more parenting tips wherever you get your podcasts. This information is for educational purposes only. It is not medical advice. Always seek medical advice from a qualified physician.